Okay, and do you want me to go ahead and introduce you now?
Please.
Okay. Okay, so let's see here. Sorry. Suzanne holds a BFA from the Corcoran College of Art and Design and an MA in Museum Studies from George Washington University. She's exhibited nationally and internationally in such venues as the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, the Museum of the Americas in Washington, the Euro-America Galleries in Soho, New York, and the United States Special Interest Section in Havana, Cuba. Her subject matter includes portraiture, still life, figurative, and landscape paintings. She teaches classes for youths and adults in her studio. She's a member of the Portrait Society of America, Oil Painters of America, and a copyist at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And we are delighted to have her with us today.
Thank you, Laura. That was lovely.
Sure.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you could join me today. I mentioned earlier, some of you were coming through, so this might be a repeat, that how I like to break down my classes is to have a lecture portion. And then from the lecture portion, we'll take a little 5-minute break. Hopefully we'll have time for that and transition then into the demo. So you guys don't feel like you have to not get a snack or, refill your cup of coffee or whatever you need to in the morning. And, if you have the reference photo, if you feel like painting along, go right ahead. But honestly, most of my students just watch and absorb. And that's how I best like to do classes as well when I take them. So without further ado, let me get, actually, let me start. I got to share my screen. Okay. And let me know if you can't see this. You can see that, right? I hate all these windows. All right, okay. So everybody can see that, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, okay, great. All right, so I designed today as kind of, it's a love poem to still life for you landscape painters. How many of you are already, and I want to see the full screen. How many of you are already painting still life as a regular practice? Okay, Kim, definitely. I know Kim. I'm looking through, so forgive me if I don't see, but it's not showing everybody. Hold on, I'll look through. Keep your hand up. Okay, Ute, I know for sure. Who else? Who else regularly paints still life?
I do.
Okay.
Teresa,
of course, yes. I'm very familiar with all your work. Okay, so fantastic. So the rest of you are not, which is great, because I hope today to encourage you to do so. So why landscape painters should be painting still life is the theme for this workshop. Let's go to my first slide. So does anybody know who this person is? I want to do a little quiz first. Now, if you don't know it, that's totally fine. Any guesses?
No.
It's John. Good, close. John Constable. So this is John Constable's landscape, and so John Constable was definitely, what's so well known for him are his cloudscapes. So a lot of you may be familiar more with his cloud paintings, and here we clearly have the combination of the pastoral landscape, which he was also familiar with, and these beautiful clouds. But not many of you may know that he also painted still life. So this is an example of his still life, which to me is rather kind of experimental for his working method. Like you can see just how traditional this painting is here on the left. And then the painting here on the right, to me, I mean, he starts definitely, painting indirectly where he does kind of your traditional, a dead color in the background, and then he's, adding some color on top. But there's just something about it that feels very modern to me. So I just kind of I'm laying down a little trail of evidence here for you all. So this is John Constable. Now we'll move to the next slide. All right. Does anybody know who this is? If you don't know, that's okay. These are who I'm showing you are very popular landscape painters. So that's why I'm just throwing it out there to see if anybody knows. This is Isaac Levitan. So he's the Russian landscape painter that so many people bow down. There's definitely a shrine, right, of exalted painters, sergeants in there. Isaac Levitan is definitely in that great shrine of painters that we all kind of admire. And so
contemporary artists?
I'm sorry?
Are these contemporary artists?
No. I can put up the dates, but Isaac Leviton is 19th century.
Oh, okay.
And
Thank
John
you.
Constable was from the 1700s. Yeah. So yeah, I can get you those dates. I should have had that, but yeah. So we're going from kind of more antiquity forward. But great question. So this is Isaac Leviton's painting, and this is his still life.
Pretty.
Isn't that beautiful? I absolutely love this. Isn't that great? I love dandelions as a subject. It's just such an uncommon thing, to see as a still life. And yet, it's very common. We all have seen them. We all know what they are. As children, we've probably all played with them and, blown the seeds away. So there's just something so beautiful about it, and just how simple it is in this earthenware vase. So you can find obviously beauty in everything, but this is his still life. All right, now the next one we're gonna go, he's contemporary painter. Does anybody know who this is? And it might be giving it away with the signature.
Scott Christensen, maybe? I can't see.
Yes, Laura, very good. Yes, Scott Christensen. So all of you guys who are familiar with Scott, he is just absolutely, again, in this pantheon of painters, phenomenal painter. I saw him demo in person not too long ago, right before the pandemic, at the Zoll Academy of Fine Art in Maryland, and he was just phenomenal. Just such a great, he's a really intense guy, very intellectual, and definitely, just knows what he's talking about. And so he talks a lot about philosophy. He's kind of like Kwan Ho, if you're familiar with Kwan Ho, the painter, another very philosophical painter that kind of thinks everything up, in the big picture, and very enlightening. So this is his landscape, which is really magnificent. He works out west. I think, is he in Laura, is he in Utah? He's out, or Wyoming?
I'm not really sure.
Yeah, he's out there somewhere. So a lot of his landscapes are of the West and absolutely beautiful. And then this is his still life. So I don't know how many of you knew that he did still life, but he does do still life. And for me, I think he's working out some of those big shape relations in his still life that this is kind of like, I think, a preparatory kind of an exercise for what he would do when he's in the actual landscape. He has said that he doesn't do a whole lot of plein air, so to speak. He actually paints, he'll do studies. He'll do a lot of studies of a locale, and then he'll bring those studies into his studio and paint the painting. So he doesn't consider himself a plein air painter. But I can see how this approach to the still life would aid in the gathering of his information in his landscape. So we'll move on. All right, does anybody know who this is? This one to me is very exciting. This person has been kind of all over the place, has been winning awards recently, and for this painting in particular.
That's Lori Putnam.
Yes, very good, Tim. I love this painting. And I know you all maybe, was she in Plein Air magazine? She was in one of the magazines just recently, and she talked about her portrait.
She won the grand prize at Plein Air Live this week.
Yes.
For this painting. And another prize for another painting.
And I'm pretty sure in this most recent edition of Plein Air magazine, she has an article in there, and she talks about the creation of this piece, and how she used her study of different times of day to recreate this painting. She took this from a reference, and it was a very crappy, pardon my French, crappy reference, so to speak. And she just improved it by, remembering all these different lighting situations and trying to impose the lighting situations on this reference photo. And I find that kind of stuff fascinating. Like, anytime that you can get inside the way that an artist is thinking, that is gold more than anything else, to understand, what's going on. So this is her beautiful landscape, and this is her still life. And gorgeous, right? I think as far as all the painters that we've seen so far, she is definitely the most versatile. Like, she can kind of paint anything, which is what Sargent, right, advised all of us to do, to just kind of just sit down and paint what's in front of you, and just paint every subject matter under the sun. And I think she definitely does that. I went and I saw a couple of her still lifes, and they were really very good. So just, absolutely beautiful. So I hope I'm beginning to make the case to you that a lot of these landscape painters are also having a healthy practice of still lifes. Okay, let's see if you guys know who this person is. This is one of my favorites, but it might be hard to kind of figure this out. This is very reminiscent to me in subject matter of Sargent, but it's not. He's a contemporary painter. Anybody have an idea? No? This is Daniel Sprick. Are you guys familiar with Daniel Sprick?
No.
He's a Colorado artist. Oh, you definitely have to look him up. Phenomenal, phenomenal painter. And he accesses the sublime in his work, which to me is like that ultimate goal for us as artists. Like, you know, we spend all this time educating ourselves and learning technique so that we can properly pictorially, you know, explain things in our work, but then you have to say something with it, right? And Daniel Sprick says something with it, and we're going to explore him a little bit more. So this is his landscape done on site, and then this is his still life.
Wow.
Isn't it gorgeous? So there's like this beautiful, sublime, surreal aspect to his work. He does portraits as well, and he's really interested in this kind of liminal light is what he calls it, like this transitional light, and I'm forgetting a little bit his reasoning behind that, but you know, just about being kind of in the in-between states of things. So that's what he's thinking about when he's painting these beautiful still lifes, and it's just so cinematic, you know. I mean, it's an entire world in this beautiful painting, right? And he's to me, it's very evocative. It just brings forth all these, you know, emotions that I don't think a lot of us can generate or, you know, begin to start thinking about. You know, he's definitely thinking on a higher level, you know, in his work. So how does he do that? We'll get to that. What can we learn from painting landscapes? So as you all know, we can learn really great, you know, great lessons on composition, description of light, rendering of color and value, simplification of subject and form. I think for me, in my mind, predominantly, those are the really strong things that you learn from landscape, especially painting and plein air. Now, why am I advocating that you should also be adding still life to your repertoire? Because to me, the still life gilds the lily. It takes all of those lessons that you've learned from your landscape painting, and then it amplifies it. So with composition, it just becomes unleashed because you are arranging all the elements, which, you know, you can do that with plein air, of course, but most people don't. Most people are kind of painting, you know, what's in front of them. Description of light in still life reveals the full possibilities of volumetric modeling. Whereas, you know, when you're painting in plein air, it's more sketch, right? Like it's a simplification, it's a moment in time. Whereas with still life, it's unlimited. So you can really, really develop all of these aspects of painting at your own time, at your own schedule, and just take it to the next level. Rendering of color and value leads to discernment of, and sensitivity to temperature. And that is such an important tool in our arsenal as artists to really be able to render temperature well, you know, and when to use it and how to use it, which Scott Christensen does beautifully in his work. So when you have time, go back and look through his paintings and you'll see it. You'll see all the very subtle renderings of temperature within his values. And simplification of subject and form leads to refinement of textures and unlocking the mystery of edges. And for me, that's what still life did for me. For me, it really made me aware of edges. And, you know, the way that I was taught traditionally, you know, at the Corcoran, it was not particularly a very traditional school. And so, you know, in the beginning of my education, I was not really turned on to the importance of edges. And really, in order to have edges in your paintings, you have to be aware of them from the very, very beginning, from the conception of your painting, you know, all the way through. It's not the kind of thing that you add later, which I always thought it was. I always thought it was like icing on the cake, you know, that you add it later. But in order for it to be truly there and truly a part of the composition, it has to be there from the very beginning, the consideration of all of these things. And working in still life allows you to develop this sensitivity and knowledge. So thank you, Debbie. Thank you for the wave. Okay, so here we go back to Daniel Sprick. So this is why I'm so excited about still life, because I want to show you how he uses it, right? How he integrates his landscape to his still life. So, I mean, look at his, again, beautiful subliminal work, right? This is a piece that he just recently posted on Facebook. And I, of course, grabbed it immediately to share with, with you guys. And then this is his setup. So this is him painting the actual painting here. We can see that he does a lovely underpainting as part of his process, which Laura, I think you probably do as well with your tonalist, your beautiful tonalist paintings. So this is his approach. And then look over here. So this is his setup. He's created this, this little vignette of this table scene. And then he's very ingeniously hung up these branches to create these shadows. Do you see this?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? And
Wow.
then look in the background. Do you see these studies? I'm going to pull it up in the next one so you can see it a little bit bigger. These are landscape studies that he did on site, and he's using these to create the mood, to create the landscape in the background. I mean, mind blown, right? That this is how he's getting the complexity in his work. He's weaving all of these different elements together, the still life, the landscape, all of it together to create this beautiful work where you are literally in this scene when you look at this painting. You're part of that painting. It's transcendent. So here I blew it up a little bit bigger so you can kind of see what's going on here. It's not a high resolution. What's that? Okay, it's not a high resolution picture, so I apologize for that, but that's what he posted on Facebook. But you can see what he did. He basically just took two of his studies, kind of put them together to see what could create a narrative, and then added that to his painting. It's just absolutely phenomenal. Okay, so how do you set up a still life? Now, when I first began with my own still lifes, I was like, oh my God, it seems so challenging, It isn't. You just need a shadow box. And behind me, I don't know if you can kind of see, but I have a shadow box that's literally just foam core. It's just black foam core. 3 panels of black foam core set up together on top of a table setting. But you can also have it created in different ways. So there are people that have also go to the trouble of making it in wood and painting them in black. And this particular one has 1, 2, 3, 4 panels. And so it's kind of it's open on 2 sides. And all you need is a single light source. Of course, you could definitely set up a still life, just in natural light in your room. And I definitely paint that as well. But for the simplicity of it, if you just want to kind of get started, I would definitely recommend the single light source. And then you can use fabric and colored paper as like compositional aids in the background, which is just awesome. And if you play around with this enough, then you can start getting things like vibration of temperature, where this started influencing the colors that were in here and back and forth. It was a really pretty setup. I haven't finished it, but one that I will begin painting from life in several sessions, and then as things kind of like die, because I always have several paintings going on, I'll return. I always take a photograph, I'll return, and maybe gild the lily a little bit more with the photograph. But I always try to start from life as much as I can, just to have that inform my work. I'm not at all against photography. I think photography is fantastic, but there are so many lessons that we learn from life that we really should be using in our work, and that's one way of doing it. And if you're going to take a photograph, I just use my iPhone, and I do it with, the photo setting, the square setting, and the portrait mode. Just play with those. The portrait mode will tell you to stand back. You don't need to stand back. Ignore it. Look for what you like in the viewfinder, and just take that picture. Okay. So then today's demo, I wanted to go through a little bit of what we're going to be doing today. When I paint, I always simplify things by creating local color puddles. And what do I mean by that? Is that this is kind of a little map for the painting that I'm doing here. So as you can see, I have a puddle here, a local color, right, is when we, squint our eyes a little bit, the average value of the average value in color of that object is your local color. So you're going for those kind of mid-tones. And so, I'm reducing things, and I'm thinking about, these puzzle pieces of shapes and what that local color is. Go ahead. Okay. Sorry, you go ahead. You guys feel free to, I don't see all of you pop up when you're talking, but feel free to interrupt. So so this local color puddle, corresponds to, to the local color of this table. This puddle here, there's actually two. So this is the value of my background and this lighter value of the light as it transitions here. So they're pre-mixes basically. And I create these puddles. And then the second one is this vase. Oh, here's Vivian. Let's let her in real quick. Okay, so hi, Vivian.
Hi, sorry I'm late. I thought I got mixed up.
No, don't worry. This is all going to be taped, so you'll have that as well. But
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
you're very welcome. I'm happy to have you here. So I was just explaining that this is kind of a shortcut that I do when I'm doing my paintings, is I set up these local color puddles, and it's literally just the local color of the object. And so here, this represents my vase and my stem, and then this is kind of going into my my tulip. And normally, like, I don't even get like this full, like I just kind of do the local color, one big puddle, and then I start making my strings from that. So you guys all know what strings are, right? Like that's basically how you're breaking down your value. So a string would be, if you continued with this, like you have your dark color up here and then your medium, and then as it gets lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter, just in one note, of color. So that would be a string, like you just continue going. So if I have lighter and lighter, it goes from dark to light within each of these value structures, and that's called, they're called strings. And so this is like the very beginning, it's kind of transitional, but normally I do just start with these puddles, and I just find it really, really helps me just jump right into my subject matter. So we're doing great on time. This should leave plenty of time for questions. This is it for the lecture, but I do have a thought for you all. I wanted to share this picture with you. This is my son, Alexander, at about 9 years old. I don't know how many of you wear glasses. I see some of you wearing glasses. Those of you who wear glasses really know what this is, right? This is the eye exam where they're putting the lenses in front of your eyes. And, and they're saying to you, does this look better? Does that look better? And I think of painting like this. I think of painting as different lenses that we're putting, in front of our eyes to see something in a certain way. And when that doesn't work, then you switch to another lens. So I used to think, I used to be very linear, or, I kind of got into this linear thought process honestly, with the whole atelier movement, advocates of the atelier, which is a fantastic education system, but it's very rigid, right? And their view is that you have to do things in a certain order and you have to do things their way. And frankly, that kind of like, it negates art history from the 19th century forward. There's been a whole lot of other things, including Impressionism, that existed, outside of the atelier movement. And I used to kind of beat myself up a little bit for thinking, oh, I didn't get this part of my education. I didn't do this, in this order correctly. I should have gone to an atelier. I should have done this. I should have done that. And now I realize that none of that's important. What's important is that you get that information. It doesn't matter when you get it, because, our brain creates these synapses, right? Like it creates these connections to information. So as long as you're getting it, your brain will connect it to another part of that information. And so I think of these synapses as these little lenses. So if I'm painting, like you'll see, I'll talk about this in the demo. But if one way of working is not working well, then I just switch to another lens and I start thinking through it through another lens. How can I approach this to resolve my problem? And that's the way that I think about it. So I hope that'll be helpful for you guys, because it definitely helps me. Okay, so now let me go ahead and pull up.
Suzanne, could I get you to elaborate a little bit more on the idea of the two different lenses that you use? Like if you're looking at something one way and you switch to another way, what are the things you switch back and forth from?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for asking that. Okay, so perfect example. So if I'm drawing, and I'll talk about that in the demo. I'm sorry. That's Amazon telling me I'm getting packages delivered. Nothing exciting. So for instance, if I'm drawing, I oftentimes will start drawing my object, right? But then I'm not nailing it. I'm not getting it. And I'm like, why am I not getting it? And then I remember my negative space drawing. So if I can't access my shape correctly, if I can't diagnose that, I start looking immediately for the negative shape around it, because there is no way that you can't, if you can describe the negative shape, there is no way that you won't describe the object. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so kind of reframing the issue.
Exactly. So that's what the lens is for me. So so I'm drawing and all that, it's not working. I can't get it. And then I remember, oh, I need to look at the negative space. And then I shift, I put that other lens and I start looking at things through the negative space. And I do that constantly. So if like things aren't working, I might look at things, oh, it's the value, or, so value is really like, is the translation of how light is cascading over form, and the modeling of form. So that's another little lens that you could look at something through. So and you don't have to, it doesn't have to be one lens at the same, by itself. It can be lenses on top of each other, like here at the optometrist, where they're putting different lenses to improve your vision. And that's how I think of it, just kind of stacking different kind of little techniques. Does that help?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Fantastic. All right, so we are at a good spot. If you guys do want to take 5 minutes before we start the demo, you can go get your coffee refilled, go to the bathroom. I'll go to the bathroom. And it's 11:32. So how about we meet back about 11:37? Okay. Does that work for you guys?
Good.
All right, excellent. Okay, got some coffee too. All right, we'll just wait a couple more minutes. Okay, we're gonna give it another minute. Hold my promises. I said 11:37. Okay, I think everybody's probably back. Is it 11:37? Yes, okay. All right, everybody. I'm gonna go ahead and hit start, and please feel free to ask questions throughout this thing, throughout the demo. I am painting here on Arches oil paper. I don't know if you all are familiar with it. I can pull it out here and show you what it looks like. This is a great product. You all see that? It comes like that, comes in different sizes, and it's fabulous. You don't have to prime it at all. You can just paint directly on the paper. And I love this for sketches. And even I've started just working on paper and doing some work like that. Sketches is great because you don't feel like you're wasting a canvas. Do you guys get that feeling? I definitely feel like that. So
I can see it, Suzanne.
oh, you can't?
I can see it. I have the YouTube. Maybe it's only me.
Can everybody else see what? Let me okay, let me go back to hold on.
It comes in a tablet, right? Like a,
Yes, it comes in a tablet. Let me go back to my screen share. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll share again to make sure that you guys can see.
Fantastic.
Sorry, thank you, Teresa. Thank you for telling me. Okay, so. All right, I'm trying to open. Okay, can you guys see this? See the
Yeah.
demo?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Can you see? Oh, can you see the arches now? Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. Good. So everybody can see. Good. Thank you. Please let me know because sometimes Zoom can be a little weird like that. So I'm working on this paper here and I just have it taped to a board. So it's a simple kind of setup. And for this particular, when I teach my classes, I'll take a reference photo because I want my students working from the same thing I'm working from. So, you know, it's apples to apples and not apples to oranges as far as, you know, describing things. So I'm starting out here with a gesture. So this is my first lens. I'm thinking to myself, how can I wrap my head around this object that I'm painting? And I'm starting with this gestural drawing. I definitely don't draw like this all the time. It's just one tool in your arsenal. And with a gestural drawing, you're going for the gesture of the object, not necessarily the specificity of it, right? Like it's not necessarily accurate. It's a gestural thing, but it's a starting point. So it's a good way to kind of, you know, reduce the shapes. You basically have two circles, right? Two kind of oval circle shapes at this point, and I'm figuring out, you know, where I can put the, you know, the beginning of my vase, and I start going from there. And eventually, you know, this works well to get placement, but then at some point, then I have to switch to that other lens and start thinking negative shape, and to kind of, you know, start getting the other shapes. I'm also thinking in terms of planar shifts, which the ateliers, like that's what you learn when you do cast drawing, is you're learning how to break everything down by angles, which is honestly the most accurate way of painting a circle. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. Clearly I did a gestural thing, that's the quickest way, but the most accurate way is to paint in absolute little angles going all the way around, and then to make it, you know, one entire circle. And that's how in the ateliers they train you to do that. I'm not doing that here. I'm jumping that step. I'm, you know, going directly for gesture. But then after that, I would impose upon that the order of the angles to correct things. And so, you know, that's the next step. Here, you know, I'm just drawing my table. And feel free, you guys, to jump in at any time and ask questions.
what pigment are you using? Are you using just
Great question. Great question, Maggie. This is I always go for usually the background color of my local color puddle that I've pre-mixed.
Okay.
The background color, or or if there's another neutral color, like sometimes I might go, whatever will most complement the subject. If the subject has a lot of browns, I might go for like, whatever brown is in that picture, but it's usually, it's a neutral. Great question. So here I'm just kind of indicating where I'm going to put in my stem. And I did this sketch was an hour long because I tried to time this so that this portion of it would work well with the workshop. And, this is the process that I work. In my classes, I kind of break things down a little bit more. I have a little bit more things that we talk about, but basically, there's, you're going through, you have like these, you're trying to reduce everything in front of you into simple shapes. And then how those shapes fit together, I call puzzle pieces. And so I'm always considering the background and my subject at the same time, because it's the integration of these things that makes for a solid painting. It's when people just focus on the object, that's when they're ignoring, everything else. You're ignoring those transitions from your subject, and the camera will autofocus. So you'll have moments where it goes, it gets a little fuzzy, but it'll autofocus to whatever I'm doing at the moment. So it'll focus again. So here and also I should mention that my camera with Zoom makes it look a little darker. So the video here will look a little darker. The value won't look quite as accurate as what I'll post. I will give you guys all the links to the actual video on YouTube. And anyway, so here I'm dropping in that local color for my vase. That's kind of the first thing. That's my subject. My goal with my work is to get everything in the first pass. So I try to approach things in an alla prima kind of way, although I don't necessarily, we just lost Richard Schmidt, right? He passed away yesterday. I don't know if you all are aware of that, but he was, definitely one of our strongest alla prima painters, modern alla prima painters. And he advocated working in alla prima, which is doing it all at once, Italian for all at once, first strike. But, that's kind of, it's a misinterpretation of alla prima. Alla prima is not always doing that. It does mean that literally, but people that worked, alla prima can also be synonymous with direct painting. And Sargent was a direct painter, but he wasn't necessarily an alla prima painter, if that makes sense. So Sargent would, he would try to get, the entire composition in the first sitting, but then in each subsequent sitting, he would just work on one area and bring that to a full finish. So he would work on the head, or he would work on a hand. And oftentimes he would, totally scrape out a head 20 times, to try to get to that immediacy of the integration of the direct painting, the wet into wet, and, what he was looking for in terms of the gestural mark making. But he certainly did not paint a portrait in one sitting, which is what people think of as alla prima, right? So that's how I approach my painting too. I want to get as much as I can get done in one sitting. By that, I mean, I want to establish here, I'm adding some of there's a reflection of red that I'm beginning to put in here. And, I want to get as much of my local color, my indication of light. I want my highlights, my lightest light, my darkest darks. It'll start getting brighter, Maggie, you'll see in a second, from the very beginning. And then if I want to improve things at the next session, then it's just gilding the lily. It's just adding on top of that. I haven't saved any area of the canvas. I want to cover absolutely everything. So here I'm just going in, and this is what I was talking about with my negative shape. I'll often go and start working on the background to conform my shape. And what I realized here was that, with my gestural drawing, I had made the tulip, a little too, like this gap here is too wide, but I had already committed to it because it was the gestural thing. I did, for the purposes of the sketch, if it was something that I was doing that I was really concerned about and I really wanted this accuracy, I would just, make it smaller. But for this, I just, continued. Going with it, but that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So I'm always looking for these little indications of mile markers of where I am and how to see the form. And this paper is interesting. So you'll see that, you know, it just has a certain texture that you just have to kind of work with. Here I'm wiping away. I'm wiping away that indication because I wanted to move the tulip a little bit closer to the vase. And I knocked the board in the process. But in the end, I just kind of, I kind of went with an in between. Not exactly as close as I wanted it to, but that's fine. Does anybody have parrots? I love that. That's
I
great.
have birds. Is
You
that
have
what you're?
Yeah, what do you have?
I have 3 finches now.
Oh, I love it. I've always wanted that. That's awesome. Okay, so yeah, again, just addressing the drawing, and I'm doing that with that outside color. So here you can see that I'm moving it. And I like to show these kind of things because, you know, I think people think that, you know, art is a process, right? It's a working process, and you're not always going to nail it. You know, your first impression of something is not going to be the right impression. You're just with these other lenses that you're putting on, it helps you get closer to the accuracy of what you're doing. So here I decided that, you know, I wanted to move my tulip down a little bit more, and I did. So I'm just trying to work quickly, just trying to put in the background color. And this paper is interesting. You have to kind of, you know, just get a layer of paint on it. But it doesn't sink in like you would think, you know, with it not being primed. So there I was beginning to add in that lighter value of the background where the light is indicating. So you want to establish your local colors, and then you want to start establishing your light and shadow key. So sometimes while I'm developing that local color, I'll just go ahead and drop in the darker and lighter. It's definitely a step, but sometimes I'll just kind of shorten that step and put that right in. Like for instance, like I really believe in putting in the highlight from the very, very beginning on your objects, because how else are you going to key an item, right? Like key your values, keying meaning like get your accuracy of values. If you don't have your lightest lights and your darkest darks in the painting from the very beginning, you're not going to nail those values. And the values are everything. It's everything. You know, color gets all the credit, but it's not color that does the work. It's the values. So you have to nail those values in order to get the transitions, and it's all that. It's the transitions that make the painting. And the transitions are your edges, you know, your values going from a darker value to your lighter value. Your midtones are really the ones that do all the work. So here, you know, I've put in that darker value of the, you know, my background, and now I want to put in the stem, and I'm just erasing it. There's a little OMS on my brush there, and I'm just wiping away. And I did cover all of that because, you know, if you paint with little cages around your work, you know, where you don't go directly into if you're too afraid to paint over something, don't do that, because that is definitely a way to not allow yourself to have a beautiful edge, right? You have to kind of paint into paint in order to move the paint around. And I definitely did that in my earlier work when I wasn't aware of it. People really didn't talk about edges when I was in college. You know, everything kind of had like a stained glass effect, you know, because I would paint to the object and then, you know, paint the background around it. But Sargent, when he painted, and here you see I'm putting the local color on the tulip. Sargent, when he painted, he would often paint his subject a little further into the background than he intended, and then he would cut back into it with the negative space to get that accuracy of the edge and also that beautiful transition with the edge. So that's something that he did all the time, which I think about when I'm painting. So here, just laying down that local color, that's just your average middle tone of this tulip, which, by the way, this tulip is one of the tulips from my garden, and I was very excited about painting it. And I came out and the rabbits had gotten to them. Just, you know, just literally decimated all of my red tulips, just ate them all. and they were on the ground. And this was one of the ones that survived. So chose this one for the video. So here so now I'm beginning to add that volume. So here's that transitional value. Again, it's going to look a little darker here in the zoom than what I have, but I'll often think about layering. So I'm thinking about what's that value and then putting another value on top of that. So there'll be a lighter middle tone that I'll put on top of that. It's kind of like chess, you know, so you kind of think, you know, what's the value behind everything? And then, you know, you're working your way forward. So this, it's probably a little hard to see at this right here, but there we go. So here's the value of the light coming in, and clearly, you know, that's changing. A red is a really interesting color, right? Like to make lighter, because one way you make things lighter is by adding whites, but if you add too much white, it makes things chalky, right, guys? So the way around that is to add different colors. So, you know, if it's a warm red, you could add yellow. Like oftentimes when I'm lightening things, I don't go for pure white. I go immediately for my lighter colors in my palette. So if my subject is, you know, is a red, I might go for, you know, if it's a warm red, I'll add yellow and a little white, but I will try to control that, how much white I'm adding, because it can definitely make everything look chalky. So here, just adding the value there in the center. And what's the difference between like a fully finished painting and a sketch? It's really just how far you take it. It's these refinements and how much detail you do on that painting. And that's it, really. Because if you're trying to work, you know, more in a direct painting way, that's how you achieve it. And there's so many painters that I admire that work in this method. I've taken a lot of classes with Michael Klein, and this is the way that he works. It's very much, you know, you make that big statement like Sargent did, and you know, you just refine it as you go, but you lay everything in from the beginning. So just wipes some of that away. Wiping and scraping is your best friend. I don't know how many of you guys are doing that, but that is an important tool that I do now, especially with edges. I'll use like I'll use a palette knife to kind of just get that pretty little edge. Here I'm adding a little bit of the background color of that table, that shadow, which I apologize, the picture's a little bit over that, but you're not missing much. You'll get the final picture too. So you'll see a lot of these values are kind of similar, and that's on purpose. You want these things to kind of, you know, melt into each other in specific areas. So here I'm doing a slightly lighter value of that table in the front. You know, it's funny when you edit these videos, you try to take out as much of the pause as possible, but there's still some of it. It's still in the end watching paint dry, really. As far as the color of that table, I use, students often ask what color I'm using. I use a lot of that transparent red oxide. If you guys are familiar with Robert Johnson, he's a still life painter. He lives in Vienna. He's a fabulous painter. He loves transparent red oxide. He's somebody that got me into that. He sells a lot out west with Legacy Gallery, and big OPA guy. But transparent red oxide is a great color to, you know, to add some warmth to things, and you can glaze things, and you can just really It's a really versatile color. So I kind of end up putting that in a lot of things. So the thing with painting bottles is you end up, when you're working this method directly, you end up kind of destroying the edges, the boundaries constantly, and you're just rebuilding them. You're kind of redrawing it, and that's part of it. Part of the creation is destruction. So you're going back and forth, and you have to be comfortable with that, and you have to be comfortable with having kind of an awkward looking painting. Just like we as teenagers go through our awkward stages, there's always that stage in a painting that's kind of awkward looking before things kind of congeal and come together, and it's having that tolerance for it that I think is really helpful. So you'll see, I'll go back and forth with redrawing this edge and doing that. Okay, now I'm starting to put in some of the lighter values, which will help me turn the form. And this is one of the best views that I can get for you guys, but occasionally you'll see my hand in the middle. I'm literally, when I paint like this, I'm literally painting with the camera right in front of me. So it's not the most natural, but it definitely gets you guys the best view. This is a better view than you get in person at any of my workshops. So that's for sure. And I don't know if you saw that, but I took the palette knife and I just scraped away. And then that just helps to make this really lovely, you know, this merging here of these two values in a subtle way. It does things that your brush just can't do. And you don't have to use your palette knife in an impasto way. Like if you don't like that look, you can still just use it to just push the paint around. But the key there, thank you, Debbie. The key there is that you have to have paint on your canvas. You know, in order to be able to move something around, you have to have paint. And Sargent is known for having piles of paint that he just, you know, put on his paintings to just move things around and get all of these transitions. And I think about it like that. I think so that here's another lens. I think about bridge colors. So a bridge color for me is the transition, which we don't see it quite yet, but you know, we'll start seeing it, which is the transition color. It's basically your mid-tone. So when you have your sphere that's being lit, you know, from an angle, you know, you have your area of light, you have your area of shadow, and that's broken up by your core shadow, which is also known as the terminator line or the bedbug line. It's that, you know, the dark line of the shadow. Your mid-tone is the area that belongs to the light that's just above that core shadow that will have your most intense coloring. It won't be as saturated, but it'll often have that most intense transition. So for instance, like if we squint our eyes, you can see kind of like a viridian green. Do you kind of see that in the picture? You'll see it more in the reference with this stem. So with this stem, when I'm going back into it, I would draw with like a viridian green along that edge as it transitions into the dark. And those are things that you use to model form that just gives it this little extra kick, this little extra punch. And you'll see me do that here on this tulip. You know, like there's like along here, there'll be areas where there's a darker value. And then this is just a more intense color, although the saturation might not be as intense as other areas. Like it's not as intense as here, right? But it's still there. And you can use that to kind of kick it into, you know, into 3D modeling. So that's what I'm doing there. I'm adding, I don't know if you can see that there, but I'm adding kind of a more viridian type green into that transition. So that for me is what I call a bridge color. How many of you guys paint with gloves? Kind of curious. Yeah, good. Great, Vivian. I'm glad you're painting. If I don't paint with gloves, I get so messy. I don't know about you guys, but I get it all over myself. I'm much cleaner when I paint with gloves.
I do too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did at one time, you know, Winsor Newton had a product that you could just, it was a cream that you could put on your hands. And I did play around with that, but I always forgot to put it on. So here I'm putting in a darker value, which is where it's sitting on the actual table. So much of this is just redrawing.
Suzanne, what size is the paper and what size brushes are you using?
Great question. Excellent question. Okay. Let me grab those brushes real quick.
Okay.
So I have a couple of brushes that are kind of what I'm using a lot. You know, I know like you guys probably go through phases where you prefer one brush over the other. I tend to use a lot of flats and rounds. I don't use that many filberts anymore. I used to. So I have mounds of brushes here. Like if you were in my studio, you'd see like I have crocks. I have an entire crock of of round brushes, an entire, divided by type of brush. But I'm mostly using just flat and round. And the one that I'm liking right now, as far as a round, and this is a synthetic, is by Montgomery. It's by Plaza Art. So those of you that go to the Plaza Art store in Fairfax, Virginia, you can also order them online. And these are super cheap. They're kind of like a mongoose synthetic. And these, I just find they're just and they're pretty strong, for laying down paint. And I have this in a size 4, and then I also have it in a size 2. And then my absolute favorite drawing brush for knocking in, a drawing is the Rosemary, the Ivory Long Flats. The Rosemary brushes, they're great. They're totally worth the money. All the brushes that I have bought, I like still use, like 10 years later. So, and I'm not even particularly good with my brushes. Like I will, gasp, like clean them like a week later. I don't necessarily clean them every day. If I'm a good girl, I'll clean it every day, but generally don't. And these are just absolutely fine with just, cleaning a little bit with OMS at the end of the day. But these extra long flats are just phenomenal for being able to block in your subject. So these are great. And I had an issue for a little bit. I would get them at the Portrait Society when they would come annually for their conference in Reston. The vendor would actually come because they're from England. But now there's a couple of outfits in the United States that sell her brushes. And the reason why I do that is because my credit card, when I order things abroad, it puts like a block on it. It automatically thinks that I'm like, getting spammed or something, right? So in order to get around that, I will order from US suppliers. And so there are some US suppliers that sell the Rosemary brushes. So just for you guys, in case you're interested.
Well, and I found too, Suzanne, that I had that same problem, but I used PayPal, and you can, just use PayPal to make just, and it works fine.
That's great. I didn't realize they were accepting PayPal now, because there was a while there where I don't think they were, and it was such a pain. Like I was, and I would get so angry. I would say, this is the same person. I do this every year. I buy brushes from these people, please don't. And I wouldn't know until I was out, and I buy with my check card, right? And I would be out trying to buy myself like a Starbucks, and I'd be declined. Right. Kind of stuff. So that's what it was. I missed a little thing here. So I put in, so you can see that I put in this reflected light of this red. And again, this is something that you're kind of, again, you're going to just reestablish, but you have to get in that color. You got to get in that value. So I'm putting that in there as well. And then beginning to lay in the stem bending. So, as we put, everything in water refracts, right? So you have the beauty of refraction. And so you want to be aware of that when you're painting a stem in water. Most likely it's going to look a little divided, and just paint it as accurately as you can without exaggerating it. And now I'm starting to add in some of the color of the that little fringe of the yellow. And this is that CAD medium with probably a little transparent red oxide. See, again, I sneak it in everywhere. So like right here where it transitions, I'll use some of that transparent red oxide, and then I'll also use alizarin crimson. So this is the CAD red, and then with alizarin crimson and some of that transparent red oxide.
Suzanne, did you say Montgomery brushes?
Yes, it's the Montgomery, it's Plaza Art Montgomery brushes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, and I find the 4 and the 2 particularly helpful. I have larger sizes, but I don't really use them. And then there's a great brush that I use a lot for bigger work. This is Michael Klein, because, you know, I took his classes. So, but they are great. Again, Rosemary brushes. Michael Klein has a set, and they're these like pastry style brushes. Like, look, they're short handles. Do you see this? But they're rounds, and they're just large rounds. So this is a number 8. And he uses this for just, you know, quickly kind of blocking in the color, and it gives a really nice effect. You know, I like, personally, when I'm painting, I'm not doing it so much here, but I like allowing the background, the surface to show through. I used to tone all of my canvases. That was a really big part of my painting. And then I realized that, you know, I was kind of covering up the life of the painting, because if you allow some of the white of the canvas to show through in certain areas, it just adds to the ambiance, to the atmosphere of the painting. There's one analogy that I like to bring up, which I'm sure, Kim, don't roll your eyes because you've probably heard this before. But I had an instructor, Paulden Hamilton. If you guys have ever taken work with him, he's great, and he's at the Zoll Academy. But he says that in the beginning of when they started doing video games, they rendered people with perfect skin, and they just looked like aliens. And, you know, it took them a while to figure out that people don't look like aliens because we have all these imperfections in our skin, you know. So I think of that as like the life force, right? So if we allow some of these kind of like imperfections of the surface to show through, it just adds more atmosphere to the work overall, and to, you know, to surfaces. So, you know, try to not smooth over everything perfectly. You know, there was a painter that I studied with at the Corcoran, that his big thing was taking a brush and just absolutely, like, he would paint indirectly, and then everything was, he was painting like the old masters, where there was absolutely no indication of brush mark, and he would just smooth everything away. And, you know, brush marks are the language of the painter. So if you're doing that and you're just, you know, smoothing everything away, you're missing this opportunity. You can get some of it back by scraping. You can scrape back even when it's dry with your palette knife before you begin a session, and it'll bring back some of that, the surface, it just adds a little bit of noise. So here as I'm closing into the shape with the background, you'll start seeing me then add that more saturated color, that bridge color that we talked about on the edge, which I'll do in certain areas, especially on the lower area. We'll see in a second. I'll point it out to you guys. Oh, there was one thing that I didn't point out here. I indicated my light source, my highlight on my object. So now at this point, I should be getting close to having my full value, right? Like this isn't as saturated as it should be yet at this point, but I have my lightest lights and my darkest darks established in this painting. And that's basically, what you want. You're creating a map for yourself. So you want to have these areas that you then build upon. And so now right there, I'm beginning to do modeling the form a little bit. And this is looking a little bit, but again, this is the zoom. It's looking a little bit too desaturated. And I think in terms of saturation, I do think in terms of, value and temperature, it's just much more helpful than to be like, well, that's more purplish or that's more reddish, everybody knows something that's desaturated. Here we go. Here I'm going with that last light. So that's where this is a more intense color on that edge as it transitions into the background. It's interesting how Zoom distorts it, the values.
Suzanne,
Yes.
that saturated color that you put there where the flower is turning,
Yes.
do you use that method only for flowers or to the vase as well?
Everything. Absolutely everything. If you look for it, you will find it. That's a great
Got it.
question. Yeah, look
But-
for it because you'll see it. And the more you start, and so much of this, guys, is like what's inside of our brain. You literally, I read this great book. I can send it to you all later, but it's the pictorial image, and it's how the pictorial image has changed over the centuries, and it's really our perception of the pictorial image that has changed. And like somebody from Masaccio's period, like let's say the 1500s, looking at a painting that we've created today would not understand it because their pictorial conventions were different prior to the Renaissance than what ours are today. So it's literally, it's so much is like what you know is then what you're able to see. You know, like even ancient man, they did not have, in the beginning, they did not have words for, the ocean was not blue to them, you know, it did not reflect the sky. It was just a dark color. They did not have words for blue like in ancient Greek and things like that. So even, you know, even, like they had red, they had black, like in their ancient texts, but when they talked about oceans, they wouldn't talk about them as blue. They would talk about them as, you know, red or like dark red, like, you know, blood boiling and things like that. And that's because that's how they,
The wine dark sea.
yes,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
That's how they would perceive things, you know. They never thought that like a clear thing had a color, but we think of clear as having a color, like, right? Like we think of clouds as being clear, but also having color. So it's really interesting how once you start thinking a certain way, then you'll start seeing things. And I think the last light is like that. So once you're aware of it, you'll be able to see it. And then it's very exciting. And, you know, I studied too with Robert Liberace, and he used to say that we should not put cages around our darlings, right? Like, so when you see that last light, you don't have to put that last light you know, around the entire tulip, you know, just put it in sections that you want to kind of pop out. And then that's how you're turning that form. They're like facets on a diamond, you know, the facet doesn't continue along the entire diamond. It has different planes. And so you're adding it selectively to those areas, but add it where you see it, because it definitely adds that pop and puts it into the next gear.
And so are the terms last light and bridge color interchangeable then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I would say that last light, I think of that more as an intenser light, but yeah, they're a last light is a bridge color.
So the last light being just before it turns into shadow.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So here I'm putting that more intense color of that CAD. And I'm also, another thing, guys, you know, when you're painting and when you're looking at other artists paint, look and see how they're holding their brushes. That's like a really big clue. A lot of people get lost in looking at what they're painting. Look how they're holding their brushes, because that's a bigger indicator of what they're doing. And so for me, if I want to mass in something, you know, I'm not delineating it with a linear stroke. I'm delineating it more with masses by kind of chipping it in, you know, and then that gets you away from, that gets you, here I put in the wrong value there real quick. But if that gets you away from delineating everything. If you put in, you know, kind of, if you're doing it at you know, at the broad side of the brush, then you're automatically thinking in terms of mass and not linear. Because if everything's delineated, it can look really stylized. So you do want to vary up the way that you're holding your brushes. You know, Sargent, oftentimes, you know, when we're painting, we should be, you know, in the beginning, very much, you know, painting from the very end of our brush, especially if we have these longer brushes. They're long for a reason, so that you're painting from the end and you're using your entire arm, you're using your shoulder to paint. And then only then, as we get closer and we're doing those details, then you can tighten up and get in there. But you really want, you know, you're missing out on getting that gesture if you're not using your shoulder. So I know in this little phase, like I had my little puddles. And then, as you make your puddle and your string, sometimes, you'll pick up the wrong color. So that's what I did here. I picked up the wrong color and just wipe it away. I mean, that's, it's just paint. You can't be scared of, okay, so this is what I tell my students. Paint is just dirt, right? And you can't let dirt push you around. You literally just have to pick it up and, push it away. So here I'm still, still trying to find that value that just sings in the right key. And that's not it. So how would you develop a painting for details? If you know you're gonna go back into an area, you could scrape it out when it's still wet, or you can just wait till it dries, and then in the next session, which is the way that Michael Klein works, and which is the way that I like to too, you just go into it dry. And in the beginning, I used to always oil in every single time that I went to do my second pass. I don't do that anymore. And I'll tell you why. Because if you oil in, you won't get that dry brush technique, which is what Fetchin used. I wish I had an example to show you guys if you're not familiar with Fetchin. But Fetchin was a phenomenal Russian painter who came and emigrated here to the United States and worked in Arizona. I think he passed away in the 60s. But I mean, he learned from the greats in Russia, the great Impressionist painters. And he has this beautiful dry brush technique. And the only way you get dry brush is if you're working on a dry surface, and then you're able to kind of just, let that texture of your canvas influence what you're painting. And that's how he worked. And so now I don't oil in so that I can get that dry brush if I want. So I can have the direct painting of the wet and wet or the dry brush look as well.
And do you employ glazing at all in your?
Yep. If need be. Yep, definitely. Yep. Yeah, all of these things, they're all, again, they're lenses. They're all interchangeable techniques that we should be using to our painting. We don't have to, at least the way that I look at it, you don't have to only paint in one way. It should really, you should use kind of all of these techniques together. I think that makes the best painting. So if there's an area that, for instance, once I've painted, just, it doesn't recede enough, like that would be a wonderful candidate for a glaze. Or if the value's correct and you just didn't quite get the color right, or the temperature right, then you can go back in with a glaze. So that would be like the perfect solution for that. And there are certainly other techniques, which Laura, I'm sure I think you probably paint more indirectly, that are much more about glazing. And so that's.
No, I actually am a pretty direct painter.
Are you? Oh, fantastic. Your work definitely to me looks more indirect. Like it has a very lovely old world kind of quality to it with the tonalism.
Thanks.
So I don't have ochre on my palette, but and the reason I don't have that is because I just use a transparent red oxide with my CAD, and I get an ochre type color. And this is a simplified palette, and it's pretty much the palette that I generally use. I'll add colors here and there.
Mhm.
right, so here adding in the light. And it's interesting how when you have all your values correct, just putting in that light, boom, it kind of makes it. And it's not, I mean, this is definitely not finished. It's a sketch. You know, if this was something that I wanted to bring to a fuller finish, I would definitely be refining the drawing a lot more than I'm doing. I'm much more interested in setting up my values and getting my transitions and my bridge colors all in there working so that I can just go back in and add my little details. But it's really interesting how, you know, you set that all up correctly and then all of a sudden, boom, it just kind of starts taking form. And I mean, that's literally what turning form is, right? It's just, you know, having all the right values in place. So at this point, I'm slowing down a little bit. I'm thinking of, you know, what is that value? What is that temperature? And I'm looking for those last light opportunities. Oh, and another thing to mention is, so in this reference, you know, when we're working indoors with a still life, you're going to have a couple of lights probably, you know, so you'll have the light of your actual object, and then you might even have an extra light from the room reflecting in your object. You can choose whether or not to include that, right? Like, I think as artists, we sometimes can be so literal when, you know, it's our job to be the editors of our paintings, right? So if you want something to have more of that feel of being painted from natural light, you definitely don't want to include, you know, those big orbs of lamplight in the reflected glass. And that's, you know, some of that's just personal taste. You know, you might see that in some other person's work, but I'll try to avoid that. So if I use, like, if that highlight looks like a light bulb, you know, I'll try to distort the shape or something so that it doesn't need that. Oh, I wanted to show you guys what I just did right here. So a highlight has two colors. It has the color of the actual light itself, that is the light of the bulb. And so this bulb is a cool light. So that center area is going to be the temperature of the light bulb itself. And then the area just outside that highlight is your couche. And couche is French for cushion. And that color is the local color of the object receiving the light. So this object is warmer than the light. And that's why that couche color is a warmer value, or warmer temperature, and then the value is darker, because it's just, the hierarchy is that this is the highlight, and then as it escapes, you know, the center of that highlight, it becomes that couche color, and it takes on the local color of your object, and it just spreads out a little bit. So that's what you're looking for, are little things like that. Vivian, if you can't see this, you'll definitely, we'll send you the final. You'll see it in that. You can blow it up.
Thank you.
Okay, very welcome. You guys feel free to ask any questions. So here I'm just, you know, just finishing up some of their, you know, I don't know how far I got with some of the detail. I'm liking a lot of these sketches now, you know, in more of an unfinished state. It's kind of something, it's interesting. I'm trying to get a little bit more abstract with my work, because I think the abstraction is really the strength behind, obviously, the design, right? So it's interesting. I'm going to be taking an abstract painting class soon, this month. I've never done that before, like pure abstract, you know, and hoping to bring some of that language into my painting. So I've done these when I do workshops. I have a 4-week workshop, which I'll pre-tape like this, and we go week by week. We kind of break down the homework assignment. and I pre-tape those. But I have another workshop that I do that's a one-day workshop, and I'll paint those live. And it's really interesting when you're painting live versus taping. I think I can talk more, you know, when it's taped. When I'm painting live, you know, you're thinking what you're doing, and then, you know, I don't know, I get a little tongue-tied sometimes, so I do like to pre-tape. I feel like,
Suzanne, I have a question for you.
yes,
On
ma'am.
one of your highlights in the vase, I think it might be the light bulb you were referring to,
Yes,
but it's
this here.
Where are you?
Okay, so can you see my my arrow here on the reference photo? I don't know if you can see that.
No.
No? Okay.
I
Well,
can see.
on the reference photo, there's two little lights. So there's the actual reflected light up here. On
I
the
see the long fluorescent lights. I see those, right?
yeah,
And then below, like,
yeah,
it's kind of, it's got a dot in front of it.
Yeah. that white one. Yes. So
Right.
the vase itself is like an old Dutch style vase that has like little glass projections. I don't know if you've
Right.
seen that, right? Yeah, I chose not to paint that one on the bottom because for me that was just distracting from the moment here. Now, how I would develop this if I would just put more of these kind of the reference itself has more turquoisey kind of blue colors that are reflections on the vase, and that's what I would put in there.
Okay, and that's the light you were referring to earlier.
Yes, that's the kind of thing that you just, you know,
Edit.
you're telling the story. Yeah. So edit it for what makes a prettier painting. And honestly, these are hard won lessons, right? Like as you're painting, it took me a long time to kind of figure that out, that, you know, I'm the master there of my vision, and I can edit things and use my artistic license and not paint everything. Just because you can paint everything, you shouldn't be, you know, you got to save something for the viewer. And also that's how you allow the viewer to enter into your painting, is if you don't explain everything to them, then, you know, their mind fills in the gaps. And that's the beauty with Impressionism, right? Is that we're seeing these colors, you know, that aren't merging together, but they're kind of next to each other, but our brain connects them. So, you know, it's allowing for more things like that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. That was a great question, Maggie. So now this painting has a little bit more, has more paint on the surface. So I'm able to manipulate my edges a little bit better and kind of refine things a little bit more. So I think another thing that we're playing with when we paint is stating things and then understating things. So you state something, and if it's too strong, then you understate it. And you kind of go back and forth. It's this little pas de deux. It's this little dance. So I think about that a lot too.
And could you elaborate on how you understate something that you've already stated? Do you soften edges? Do you wake?
Yep, all the above. So I would most likely start. I'll be right back. Let me grab a. This is kind of my best friend now. Is a palette knife like that. So your little tiny. What shape would that be? I don't even know. Chisel
What
shape.
number? What number is the palette
This
knife?
is. It's Italian. It's a 44 plus is what this one is. I don't know if that's at all helpful, but just tiny and this kind of diamond chisel shape. And then you can go into the edge and you can just kind of smooth that out and just transition out of it and understate it without ruining it. You could also go back in with a paper towel. You know, you could go back in with scrapers. Like just experimenting with all these things are fantastic. There's another where's my scraper? Sorry, my studio's a little messy. So these are great, these catalyst scrapers. That's another way. you know. There are a lot of painters that I've been experimenting with. Here you can see I'm moving in. This is kind of a little bit more elegant, like in terms of like the transition of that last light as it's turning. So now you begin to see how things kind of knit together, you know. But these catalyst wedges are great, and there are a lot of painters. Like I've studied with Kathleen Speranza. If you guys are familiar with her, she does these gorgeous rose paintings. They're just so sublime. Like it's really, she's not painting flowers, she's painting like the life force of things. It's really gorgeous. And she does this process of destruction. So she will paint an image and then she totally destroys it. And she does that a couple of times, and then she's just building it up and building it up and building it up. And then that's what adds the atmosphere of the life force of her paintings. It's really more about, you know, the stillness of that room, you know, and she gets that by just destroying things. And one way you can destroy things is with a wedge. Another way you can destroy things is with sandpaper. And you just wait till it's dry. And that's what Kathleen Speranza does, is she will go over it with sandpaper, and she calls that her ghost image. So what she's left with, I wish I had it because I've done some experiments with that myself to incorporate that as part of my process, a similar version. But she will do like, she'll do her underpainting and then she will just let it dry, and then she'll go over it with a fine grit sandpaper, and she'll just obliterate it, and then she'll go back into it again in a different area. And Kathleen, she works from photographs actually, and what she does is she's taking photographs, and she will find photographs of roses, and she paints predominantly roses, and she'll save them on her iPad under certain colors or under like a certain name, and then she's looking for that same position of that rose in another photograph that maybe shows a little bit slightly different angle to it, and then she paints that into it. So it's like an amalgamation of all of her little pictures. And that tends to have, it has a much more dynamic view than something static that you're only looking at it from one position, you know? So there's so much that you can do with it.
So it offers a sense of movement almost.
Exactly. And I think that's what we need. Yes, most definitely.
Thanks.
Great question, Laura.
Do you ever use Q-tips?
I do. Yes, that's another great one. Yep, definitely. Q-tips are great. Any of those things are great. And there's another, I have that upstairs. I have another tool that is, it's a sculptor's tool. I can send all of this when I do the final, when I send you guys the last materials. But, you know, so the same group that does, no, this is Windsor Newton, I think. The Color Shaper, it's British. They spell color wrong. Just kidding. COLOUR. But anyway, so there's all of these like color shapers that you can get in different points. And I have one, this little tiny one is like a wedge shape, a chisel shape, and then this one is just a round. And there is a sculpting tool that's made for sculptors that I can send to you all. You can get it on Amazon. And I use that constantly. And on one end, it has like a pointed shape. On the other one, it has a chisel. And I'm always that's how I wipe away a lot if I want to wipe away in a little area, because you can kind of destroy things, right, with a paper towel if you don't perfectly, right, fold that up like a little origami shape, you know, if you're not careful. Mm-hmm. So that's the final sketch. That's where I left it at. You know, if I were to, I'm gonna press pause so that I can make sure that that's on pause. Okay. If I were to refine this more, I would spend much more time on this bottle, just making sure that, you know, that the concavity of the object is correct. I mean, that's such a big part of painting bottles. And you know what? There are some big painters, I'm not going to name names, that once you're aware of their inaccuracies in drawings, like you just see it. So when you're painting like things like you know, a circle, when it's viewed from a certain angle, becomes an ellipse, right? So if your ellipse is incorrect, and one way to draw an ellipse correctly is just draw that center line and make sure that, you know, each half reflects the same angles as it turns. So little things like that you have to put into consideration, because it's the kind of thing that people notice in still life. It's like in anatomy, you know, if you get the anatomy wrong on a person, people notice. People know what people look like, you know, and the same kind of thing. We know what objects look like, but there are some phenomenal painters, I'm not going to name names, that are, you know, teaching wonderful classes and making a lot more money than me, that every single time I see them paint a vase, you know, it's just inaccurate. And I'm like, how can you possibly not like see that, you know? But it's just that they're just not aware of it, you know? So little things like that, just to be aware of, you know, of spheres and concavity and ellipses, and, you know, architectural elements, I guess you have to just be aware of in still life. But I think how are we doing with time? So we got like, you know, a couple more, 20 more minutes, I guess. We finished a little early. Please feel free to ask any questions. I hope that this has inspired you guys. You know, how many of you guys are going to tackle some still life after this? I hope all of you.
Maybe.
I don't know, those
Maybe.
these,
No?
they get me. Those, you know, trying to do a saucer and a cup, it just, woo.
Yes. Well, but that's, you know, then don't do both of them together. Just do one at a time, you know?
Right.
And there's no, you know, there's nobody behind your shoulder. You know, you're in your studio, you know, it's not like you're painting outside and people are like behind you staring at what you're doing and making comments. Like, whoa, when I was at the National Gallery, that was hardcore. That's like
Imagine.
oh yeah, that is, you know, those people, I mean, they know their art and they come to look at art and they will tell you if something's wrong, you know? So that's a contact sport, you know, coffee in person. But when you're painting still life, you know, you're just in your home. And I really feel like it's just, for me, it's helped me access all this final layer of this 10th degree, this 9th degree of, you know, of my painting, and expanding it in terms of more of these emotional qualities that, you know, you can't get if you're just being so literal, you know. I spend, another thing that I do a lot, and I may have talked about this in a recent workshop, so forgive me, but I spend a lot of time thinking a lot now, which I didn't do so much because, well, I like to think that I think, but I mean, as part of my process, you know, I didn't really correlate writing with art making, and it is so important. I don't know how many of you guys are journaling or doing your morning pages. You know, there's that great book, The Artist's Way. You know, I'm forgetting the name of the author right now, but she advocates doing what's called morning pages. I don't know how many of you guys do this, but it is something that I fought against. You know, I knew of that book back in art school, and I had a friend who had totally transformed her practice, and I was like, oh, that's too much work. I don't have time to do this. I don't have time. And now I realize that, you know, reserving a part of my morning for just thinking has helped me so much in terms of developing my own work and developing my career, like where I want to go with my work. Just having that time to think. And I have a journal, and it's literally, it's this. This is my journal. And I just write in here every morning with my cup of coffee. And some mornings I'm just thinking through things like problems with my, oh, great, Joanne, fantastic. Great, we're matching here. So, you know, sometimes I'm just thinking through problems. Like if I'm like, you know, why is this shape not working? And I'll just sit here and I'll just write about it for a couple paragraphs, and it all of a sudden it kind of clicks, and then I get in the studio and I execute it. So that's been a really great tool for me. But also giving myself like questions, like prompts. Like if I'm you know, researching or things like that, I will you know, I'll find like here, I'll pull up a prompt real quick. So, you know, I use my notes all the time on my phone. This is a great thing because when I'm walking around, I want to write things. So I literally have a note that says writing prompt questions. Like, what are my goals for the next 5 years? Like, how many guys are you guys thinking of this? You know, how do I define success for myself? What is the driving force behind what I'm currently making? What are my creative strengths and skills, and where do I need improvement? How do I feel when my work is criticized, and how can I work with this? what elements of this career bring me the most stress? That's a good one for me right now, actually, during COVID. What do you want your artistic legacy to be? You know, and so just collecting these thoughts and then using this as a prompt. So I will literally sit down and, you know, yesterday's prompt was, what are my goals for the next 5 years? And then I just start putting things down, because if you don't do this, if you don't make the time to do this, you are just kind of like, you know, you're not controlling your destiny. You are just being reactive to your daily day. And I don't know how many of you, you know, we're mothers, right? We have families, you know, my time is not my own also, you know, I have a family to take care of. And so doing things like this definitely, it just gives me a little bit more, it defines my goals better and gives me, it's not as ambiguous, you know, it gives me things to think about and to plan for. And I think if we're not constantly creating our future, you know, it kind of writes itself, right? So, you know, if you're aware of it and you're kind of making these little plans, it definitely helps. And I've used this for my writing. You know, we all have to have artist statements, right, on our website. So that's another important thing, is to just sit down, you know, what is your painting about, you know, and write about it, you know, and write about it in simple terms, you know, write about it in active voice as opposed to passive voice. And, you know, these are, it's this kind of thing. It's this kind of thing that can really, you know, help you. So I would advocate for all of you guys to you know, to keep this, you know, to do kind of the morning pages thing. It's definitely, she advocates doing like 3 pages at a time. I don't think you have to do as much as that. There are some days that I only get a page or a paragraph. Joanne, I don't know how you're doing with yours, but it's like that. Yeah.
No, I thought she was militant about the 3 pages.
She was.
For a while, I would get smaller and smaller books.
Yeah. She is militant. That aspect, I don't feel like, you know, you have to sign up for. But you know, there are some days that I get 3 pages out, and I understand it. Like, it's helpful to be, because it kind of, you can do like a brain dump. Like, I don't know how many of you guys are, you know, stressed out with your normal day. I certainly have been like that recently. And then we carry all these things in our head, and it's helpful to just write it down, and just the moment you write it down, you can start making your lists and planning your day and checking things off. And that's the only way that I function. So anyway, that's a whole lot to say, that I just think that that's so much now of my creative process is my writing, and in the morning. So I do my writing, I do a little 10-minute yoga, and that sounds like, you know, very woohoo-y, but it's literally 10 minutes of YouTube yoga for free. And it just stretches me out and gets me in the studio, gets me kind of limbered, because, you know, we can, you know, as painters, right? Like we're kind of like Tyrannosaurus Rex with our little arms out like this, like at an easel all day long. And it can cause a lot of pain in our shoulders and arms. I don't know if any of you guys have experienced this. And for me, the solution to that was yoga, was just doing a little bit of yoga in the morning or at the end of my day. And I literally Googled 10-minute yoga, and I'll Google like shoulder or neck, like whatever's bothering me. I'm in my 40s now, you know, so I definitely have that. And I find that it's from kind of like hunching up at the easel, or, you know, just having my little T-Rex arms out in front of me the whole day, you know. So
how many hours a day do you spend in your studio?
I try to spend 4 to 5 hours a day, and I'll break it up. So I have like a morning portion. I can't sit and just do 5 hours straight. So I'll do like 2 hours, go have lunch, and then in the afternoon. My son now is 14, so I have a little bit more of the gift of time, but he's not homeschool. He's long distance learning. So I get full reports. Like, he comes down after every class to tell me how he's done on his classes. Yeah. And it's wonderful, but at the same time, it breaks my concentration for like, you know, long enough to get back into it. But that's how I organize my day. On a perfect day, that's how it is. I have a morning session where I'm working on one painting, and then I have a PM session after my lunch, and it's a totally different painting. And I find that is a great way for me to kind of just move forward on projects. And, you know, I can, you know, really, you know, I can just kill something easily by just going too far into the details, you know. And I think a lot of us can do that. You can just kill a painting and take the life force out of it by just putting in too many details. And working like that on 2 different pieces at the same time allows you the space and the grace to just walk away from it and not think about it and come back to it with a refreshed eye. Because I don't know how many of you guys have done this, but I certainly have, where, you know, I have a painting and, you know, I used to think quality over quantity. Like that was my thing as a mom. I was like, well, I don't have X amount of hours. I try to shoot for 20 hours a week studio, but a lot of times if I'm teaching workshops, that gets cut into it. You know, as a mother, you know, I didn't feel like it was possible for me to create a large body of work. So I wanted to focus just on like creating one beautiful painting. And if I had only a couple a year, I was like, well, at least I have 4 fabulous paintings a year. And I realized that I actually did a lot of harm to myself doing that, because then I had this perfection thing that, you know, everything had to be, you know, perfect. And I would go in and repaint things over and over again for no need, because I wasn't like, you know, really stepping away from it and working on different things at the same time. And I just think that's such a big part of the, you know, the process in doing that. I try to have banker's hours. Like I try to work, you know, within that 9 to 5 window, because I have a family. I want to make dinner and be with my family at, you know, after the studio hour. And I you know, I will paint on the weekends, but really it's family time. So it's really Monday through Friday. It's generally at this point where I'm at. But COVID has been interesting, right, guys? I don't know how that's affecting you all, but it's definitely like, it's interesting because in the beginning I was like, oh, I'm loving it. I'm doing sourdough. I make sourdough bread, and I was gardening in my, you know, doing my vegetable garden and painting every day. And I was happy as pie, because as painters, you know, having more time in the studio is a blessing, right? But now it's like, it's getting to me. So I finally escaped. You know, I went to the Sporting Library and Museum. I don't know how many of you guys have ventured there, but you know, there's not a large attendance to that museum. So you can go and you can literally be the only person in that museum. And I just went and I saw an exhibit of a painter who won the Prix de West. I'm forgetting his name. Beautiful Western landscapes with, you know, with bighorn sheep and stuff like that. And I had the entire museum to myself, you know, so I highly recommend it, you know, and everybody me and the employees had masks on. And so I'm beginning to venture more and more like that. But I think we need it. And certainly in the plein air, you know, now that season's starting up, that's going to be great to get out and see all of you. That's exciting about the Rappahannock boat launch. That I definitely, I won't hit that today, but hopefully I can hit that next week.
And Suzanne, do you devote any time specifically to drawing in your practice?
Yes, I try to draw. I mean, ideally, I think we should all be drawing every single day. I'm forgetting the painter. There's a German painter that had a Latin quote, and it was like, "Non dia sine linea." It was something like that, like not a day without a line, like without drawing, you know. And he was, I mean, Metzer, I think that's his name, and phenomenal painter. And it was because he drew every single day. And ideally, I'm saying ideally, because in an ideal day, I draw in the evenings to kind of unwind, you know. So that's when I draw. I'll sketch, and then I'm also doing gouache. I do enjoy gouache. I like the simplification of it. And I like, you know, I like just working in a notebook. And so, you know, on an ideal night, you know, while my boys, when I say boys, I mean my husband and my son, they're boys. They like to play video games together, and I can't stand the video games, but I'll sit there and I'll draw on my sketchbook just to be in the same room with them. And that's usually when I do it. Or when I'm cooking, you know, like we have to sit there for an hour watching a pot boil or whatever. I'll have my sketchbook there and I'll sketch a little bit while I'm cooking. So that's a good way to fit it in. But yes, you know, drawing is super, super important. I really think that drawing is painting, you know, especially if you're doing direct painting, it's really all about your accuracy of drawing, you know, your values and everything as well. But so the drawing is so important. And when we want to advance as painters, what do we often do? We go back to drawing. I don't know if you guys have done that, but that's an important way to break through things in your painting is to draw. So that's a great question.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I would imagine you're doing the same thing, Laura. Sounds like.
Well, yeah, I came to the conclusion that lack of drawing skills was what was really hurting me. And so I started taking drawing classes, started last year with the club. I did mostly drawing when we went out to do plein air, and I'm planning to do some more of that too.
Fantastic. Are you doing pastel too when you're doing the drawing?
A lot of it has been charcoal. I'm really
That's
obsessed with
great. Yeah.
I- yeah, and and some graphite. And I just started working with gouache a little bit too. I took Kim's
Yes.
up. Yeah. So
Yeah, I missed that. No, I know Kim's a big advocate of that as well. There's something so exciting. And Scott Christensen's working a lot in gouache, and that's been really neat to see, what that's brought to his work.
yeah, he can paint with anything, but
Yeah.
I find it really challenging,
Yes.
about everything. Yeah.
Yes. And I think having good quality gouache is important. I don't have particularly good quality. I need to upgrade and get some Winsor Newton. We'll see maybe what Kim would advise me, but I definitely have, what is it that I have? It's a German brand, and I just got like a cheap set, like just to have the set. And now I realize that a nicer set, it's like anything else, the pigment won't fight you, as much. I think it's that, having good quality paint.
The quality of gouache definitely matters.
Yeah.
My favorites are M. Graham, Holbein, Winsor Newton, and I can never pronounce it, Schmenke.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Those are my favorite ones.
M.
And
Graham.
the cheaper brand, M. Graham,
Uh-huh.
Holbein,
Uh-huh.
but be careful with Holbein not to get the acryla one. That one has acrylic in it. You won't be able to go back into it.
Okay.
Winsor Newton and Schmenke. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I have no
Oh,
idea.
that's great. Awesome.
And the quality matters. I mean, when people complain about chalky looking gouache, it's because they're using junky gouache.
Yeah.
And it literally has chalk in it to make it opaque.
Interesting.
So good gouache is opaque because it has a higher pigment load.
Yeah. And then the Winsor Newton, they just have so many more colors, right? Don't they have like a really expansive?
They do. I find that M. Graham and Holbein's colors are much more brilliant straight out of the tube than the Winsor Newton. So I'd rather start brighter and tone it down than, because you can't make it brighter you can only make it as bright as it is when it comes straight out of the tube.
That's interesting. Is the M. Graham just as like creamy as their oil?
It's gorgeous. Yes, it is. It's like luscious.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
It's like painting with velvet or something. I mean, it's just really great texture. That's what I love about it.
That's great. Do they have good sets? Like, have you bought it in set or do you buy individual?
Yeah, I use a really limited palette right now. So I just bought individual tubes. I bought my split primary palette and then called it. In fact, it's not even a full split primary palette. I have 2 reds, 2 yellows, and 1 blue and white.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's been fun. I've really enjoyed that. And the charcoal, that's another aspect that I'm getting into as well. I took a class with Ramon Hurtado. He's the one who did that 19th century. He basically figured out how they were drawing in the ateliers in the 19th century. And it turned out it's not what they're doing in the ateliers now. They have a different version of the drawing. What they're doing now. It's interesting. And his class was all about, doing the figure. That's a great class, Laura, if you want to look into it. The 19th century atelier with Ramon Hurtado, and it's all Zoom. I will warn you though that he's in the California, so a lot of his classes are kind of later in the day, and then he gives you a lot of value for your buck, but you'll be taking the class till 1 o'clock in the morning, which is what he did with me. He would just kind of add on an extra hour or something to the class, and I'd be exhausted, but phenomenal. And working with a plumb line and breaking down the figure very, very quickly and accurately with that plumb line, and then just stumping, like it was all about stumping. And whereas the ateliers teach, they're going with like if they're doing graphite pencil, like they're just kind of hovering over this one little area, and they'll spend an entire week on one arm, just developing the value on that one arm. Whereas all of his reading, and he has the actual sources, say that it was really, they achieved that with stumps, which is something that the atelier world now just kind of frowns upon. So it's kind of like what they're doing now has some roots in the French Academy, but it's really, another version, a reinvention of it. So it's kind of a little different. But with a stump, you could work much more quickly to get your values, with the charcoal.
Right.
And
Right.
that's the method that he does. And then, you know, you erase with the eraser, and in the ateliers, they used to use bread to erase, which is kind of cool. You could still do that. Go get some crusty bread and just
Right.
do that.
Right.
But yeah, but I do love that as well. I love both those mediums. Those are fantastic. And when I go out with the group, I don't generally do like I'm just doing sketches. I'm not thinking about doing you know, a finished painting. Oftentimes it's because I can't make it out that second time, you know. You could definitely, all of these things that I'm trying to advocate in you guys to grow your practice in terms of like all this sensibility that you get from still life, you could definitely get it with plein air, but I think you'd have to be in the same spot at the same time over like a month of painting to really fully unopen all these gifts. You know, I don't think you get it just with one, one impression of the place. You know, you're it's more of a simplification is what you're doing, you know, when you're on site for that one session. I think, you know, like Gavin Glackus, he paints from life, and he will go for, you know, an entire month to the same exact spot at the same exact day and develop his entire painting in plein air. And that's his method.
And then you can't guarantee. You got cloudy days, you got sunny days.
Exactly. Yep. You just, you know, you do your best, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's you know, there are different ways of approaching this. And like I said, Scott Christensen, one of our most fabulous landscape painters, doesn't consider his work plein air at all. Like, he's just doing studies. And I think that's pretty much, you know, that's a wonderful way to work as well. You know, so to take as much reference on site and to build it like Daniel Sprick does as well, with, you know, informing the landscape into his work by doing these sketches and then using that to reconstruct scenes like vignettes. I just think that's fascinating, you know. So there's so many different angles to come to things. And if people tell you, you know, I may sound like I'm a little anti-atelier. I'm not at all. I think they teach fabulous things, and there's some fabulous work coming out of the ateliers. But you know, it's a very rigid way of thinking, and if there is not one way to do anything, you know, and if anybody tells you that there's only one way to do it, they're lying. They really are. You know, there's so many different ways to come about this, and so many different angles to look at things. And, you know, we should just be open, you know, to developing our vision and to looking at things through the different lenses, and, you know, whatever works, you know. So, and again, you know, I think teaching is like one part. Kim and I talked about this, I think my last little workshop, right? That it's you're one part teacher, one part coach, you know, one part, you know, inspirational speaker. Like, you know, painting is hard enough without us beating ourselves up as to like that we didn't get the right education, or we're not doing things correctly. You know, just paint, and you know, you'll figure it out as you're, you know, walking that path, you know. So how are we doing on time? I don't want to keep you all. I think we're right about
Yeah.
time. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts?
No, this has been great.
Oh, good. I'm so glad you guys that you got something out of it. If you guys are on Instagram, please follow me. I will post about my classes and stuff. I do have a rose class coming up in June. I need a little time off because I was doing a workshop every single month, and it's a little too much. Oops, sorry. So I am going to I'm going to do one 4-week workshop in June of roses, which highly recommend you guys painting roses if you're not painting roses already. I mean, the roses are the gateway to the sublime. There's so much beauty that you can get in that rose that you're just not going to see in other flowers, you know. So, you know, rose season is coming up, and the roses I use are from my garden. And then I have in July, I'm going to also do a rose workshop, but it's one of those 1-day workshops, which it's just a 3-hour workshop. And then I have a pumpkin thing coming up in the fall. I did have, for those of you that are interested, I did have a workshop that I was going to do of painting shellfish, still life of shellfish. I have a painting that I did of a dead octopus that I saved from a wonderful Korean market. I didn't eat him, I just painted him. He was beautiful. And so that one, not quite sure if I'm going to run it, but if you guys are interested, you could always email me and we could get a group of people. But anyway, that's what's up with me. This has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed spending the time with you. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be with me and not out with the group painting. I appreciate that. I understand that you had to probably pick one or the other. So
Thank you,
Well,
Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Suzanne.
you so much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much. So Laura, I will send you all of these materials for you to send to the group.
Okay,
Yes, and please send the
Right.
recording too.
Most definitely. Yes. Oh, yes.
Bit of the beginning.
Yes.
Of the family crisis.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Could you, for a beginner oil painter, could you provide the colors you used to make your puddles?
Most definitely.
Like
Yep.
the combinations?
Yeah,
Okay,
most
thank you.
definitely. Most definitely. I do think, Vicky, I do think it's much more helpful to think in terms of, the reason I didn't do that is give you a formula is because I think it's much more helpful to think in terms of value and temperature. So you can arrive at things a little differently if you think that way, right? Because, you know, certain brands of paint are going to be slightly warmer or cooler depending on the brand, right? So it's more helpful to ask yourself, how dark is this? How light is this? How cool or how warm?
Yeah, I'm okay with playing around with the proportions, but
Yes.
the actual colors to get started,
Sure.
because I sit here and mix for like an hour just to get the right color, and
Yeah.
like I don't know what I'm doing apparently.
Yeah, well, you know what? You're not alone. And I do want to say
Right.
one thing that I'm doing lately, which I want to just impart to you guys, is all those mixes that you guys use, save it. You know, like I used to waste so much paint, just get rid of all of it. You know, you could have a little dark puddle there on your palette. I paint on a glass palette, so I'm able to just kind of save little puddles. And I do that a lot with my lights. So anytime that I contaminate the whites, I will scrape that down and I will make little puddles based on like a hue. So I have a little puddle of like a yellowish white going on. I have a little puddle of like a bluish white going on, you know, different values. And then you can add that paint into your mixes that you're mixing for that day. And what that does is it adds texture to it, because as paint dries, it gets all that grittiness and crustiness. It'll do different things to the paint. And that's really fun to play with as well. So that's something lately that I've been doing that's been exciting, and kind of a cheap way of not like using, you know, recycling the paint that you're already mixing. So it's not bad, Vicky, that you're going through all those. You can still reuse it. So, but yes, I'd be happy to do that. I'll write that down right now. And so it'll take me, you know, I need to, everything's uploaded. The recording, I should be able to get that to you tonight. So I'll get you all those materials tonight, tomorrow morning at the very latest.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Suzanne.
That's very.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining me today. Really, really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Okay.
Thanks.
Have a great day. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.